Yo, how's it going everybody? It's Sketch and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Midnight Resistance, developed and published by Data East. This is a side-scrolling run and gunner released in 1989 for the arcade and received a port to the Sega Genesis in 1991. You might also remember this game being prominently featured in RoboCop 2 during the arcade scene. This is one of the first games I remember renting way back in the day when the Genesis released, and it still stands up as a solid run and gun game even now. Though before going much further, let's catch up on the story. The story in the Genesis version differs slightly from the arcade version, but both are essentially the same. Set in the dystopian future, two brothers and members of the resistance movement go on a mission to rescue their kidnapped family from the villain only known as King Crimson. After returning from a mission in South America subverting the cartel, Johnny Ford returns home to discover his family missing in retaliation for his actions and his father's creation of a serum to help people break their addiction to all narcotics. With the government powerless to help, Johnny sets out alone on a quest to crush King Crimson and rescue his family. Gameplay-wise, is a 2D run-and-gun game that in appearance is fairly similar to Contra, though it's got a few notable differences. The arcade version used a rotary control system for aiming in all 8 directions and being able to lock your aim while moving, whereas the Genesis version uses the B button to lock your aim and the A button to turn auto-fire on or off. The game also uses a similar system to getting power-ups as seen in one of Data East's previous titles, Heavy Barrel, in which keys are picked up from enemies and later used to unlock cases in the weapon rooms before each stage. In the weapon rooms, you can spin the keys to get a few items of your choice, ranging from homing missiles to shotguns and flamethrowers. The Supercharge is pretty sick to grab when available since it buffs your current gun and it puts in work. Thing is with this game, going through the 9 stages, it only takes one hit to get smoked, and if you lose a life, you drop your weapons and your currency. Sometimes if you're really unlucky, your gun can and will fly off screen, and it is gone if it leaves your sight. Though the gameplay itself is a shoot everything that moves affair, and it's pretty dope, but it's also pretty difficult, especially up until you get more comfortable with the controls and especially with the aiming. It's one of those run and gun games that at first has a bit of a learning curve, but the more you play it, the better it starts to feel. There's also a few different control mappings, so you can try out if the defaults don't quite gel. Graphics wise, is a pretty sharp looking shooter too. Sprites and environments got a good bit of detail, and the levels are pretty diverse, from rolling into the base on the hood of a jeep to being nearly in orbit for the final battle with King Crimson. The levels are all pretty interesting with the background and foreground tricks in a few stages also. The jungle stages and the bombing fleet level were also a couple of particular favorites. The boss designs and the fights in this game are also pretty tight for the most part, especially the encounters towards the end. The lightning boss was where runs would usually end back in the day until I figured out how to avoid his attacks and lock the aim on the conductors that are above and below him. Also, the King Crimson battle at the end too is also pretty sick. I mean, he like spits brains at you. It's pretty amazing. While not all of it is the most groundbreaking, there's still a lot of unique things visually here, and it runs at a relatively steady frame rate too, with only a couple spots where it gets bogged down some. It's mostly the battleship section that I can really remember that it slowed down at all, but even that part was still pretty fun. Sound-wise, this is one of my favorite soundtracks on the Sega Genesis. The tracks in the game from the rip are banging, and this is one of those soundtracks that's also really driving, and the instrumentation here is on point. The drums in the game especially are super hype, especially with the double bass kicks every so often. The sound effects themselves are also pretty good with all types of crunchy explosions and firing effects. The soundtrack alone is a good reason to play through this one since it has such a good sync with the action. Overall, Midnight Resistance is a really solid run and gun game for the arcade as well as the Sega Genesis, and can usually be found for relatively cheap. It's always one of those games that'll keep you coming back after a while, since it's much like Contra, it's fun to run through once you get past the difficulty. Midnight Resistance gets an 8.5 out of 10 and comes highly recommended to shoot 'em up fans and also run and gun game fans as well. If you can find this one around your local shop or online, check it out. You'll be glad you did. And if you made this far in the video, I thank you again for checking these out. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and video commentaries coming up in the future, but until then, stay safe out there, take it easy. I'll see you on the next one.